Hello and welcome back to Game Review. My name is Caleb Denby, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 1968 game between Boris Spassky and Efim Geller. This was a game played in the Candidates. It was round 6 of the Candidates, I believe. And Boris Spassky had the white pieces here. We're going to see how he approached this game against Geller. The game started with e4, c5, knight c3 actually, d6, and g3, knight c6. This is, of course, the closed Sicilian. You don't see this one as often these days. Usually, players favor the open Sicilian, the Rossolimo, plenty of other lines that give white somewhat of a pressing edge sometimes. The closed Sicilian, not as well respected these days, but it does give white some very clear plans, which we'll see in the game. So, of course, it's called the closed Sicilian because you're not playing d4, opening the center. You're playing d3, keeping the center closed. Black fianchettos on the king's side. We see f4, knight f6, knight f3. Note that white pushes this pawn to f4 before developing this knight, saves him a little bit of time in the long run. Black castles, white castles as well. And now black plays rook b8. And this is kind of the theme of the game that we'll see here. This is how a lot of closed Sicilian games go. White pretty much commits to playing on the king's side, using these pawns to launch an f5 attack, opening up files, opening up diagonals on the king's side. This is where white is trying to kill the black king. In the meantime, though, black is using his advantage on the queen's side, using this spatial advantage to push all the way through and try to create enough threats on the queen's side to get here in time before white checkmates black. And this is the kind of opening, kind of middle game that you get actually when you see a closed center. Things like the closed center allow each side to play on different sides of the board. And it makes for an interesting game. We see white start with h3. Of course, like I said, he's going to launch a pawn storm on the king's side. In the meantime, black wastes no time, immediately plays b5. Like I said, launching his own attack on the queen's side. Now, in order to stop the b4 move, white actually goes for a3 here. These days, I think g4 is a bit more common, just totally ignoring black on the queen's side, but a3 makes some sense. You don't want to play b4 immediately, because this structure actually turns out to be a bit better for white. The rook on the a file is going to be more relevant than the half-open c file. So instead, black plays a5, further preparing b4. White takes this time to get developed with bishop e3. Black breaks through with b4. White does capture this, and now we see knight e2. In this case, black cannot step on the a file just yet, of course, so he needs bishop b7 to prepare that. And now white plays this move b3. This move is aimed at kind of slowing down black's queenside pawn storm, although I'm not a huge fan of it. In positions like these, I really like just ignoring the opponent on the queen's side until he makes a substantial threat. Obviously, if he makes a substantial threat, you have to respond to it. But in the meantime, I think white should be focusing more on the king's side play. b3, not a bad move though. We see rook a8 from black, now taking control of this file. And rather than trade these rooks or let this rook sit on the a file, where it might run into some trouble eventually, Spassky plays rook c1. And I kind of like this move. It invites the fox into the hen house, as Yasser Seirawan would say, one of my favorite chess analogies that I've heard. But in this case, the fox kind of has no teeth. He's attacking this c2 pawn, but we've already defended this pawn with our rook, and it's going to take black quite a while to be able to make any threats on the queen side of the board here. And this gives white some time to finally follow through on his own play on the king's side, with g4 to start. Black now plays queen a8, trying to get more pieces in on this a file. And now white plays a very common maneuver with queen e1, eyeing some of these squares on the king's side. Queen a6 is black's choice, and now perhaps f5 should have been played for white. He first plays queen f2, keeping an eye on some dark squares as well, perhaps hinting at even e5 breaks, although I kind of doubt it here. In the game, black plays knight a7, perhaps rerouting this knight to b5 and opening up this diagonal. And now white does play the key pawn break f5 in the position. And now we see that black's queenside play is simply far too slow. He tries knight b5, getting this knight to a better square, trying to get it to a3, trying to break through onto c2. White simply takes on g6. We see h takes g6, and now knight g5 from white. And there are threats on the f file, there are threats on the h file, there are threats everywhere on the board for white here. Black does continue with knight a3, trying his best to make something happen on the queen side, but after queen h4, the threats are going to be too much around black's king. Rook c8, and then I'll let you at home try and find the finishing blow here. Well, not quite finishing, but the start of the finishing blow. Go ahead, pause the video, see if you can find it. Of course, it is the classic sacrifice, rook takes f6. And now black is doomed. Of course, bishop takes f6 is horrible. It allows checkmate in 2. E takes f6 is a little bit of a better try. This is what black does in the game. Queen h7 check to follow. King f8. And then do we retreat this knight away? Our knight's attacked after all. Of course we do not. We play the nice follow-up sacrifice. Knight takes f7. Of course, if you take this piece, you're going to run into bishop h6. And after rook g8, knight f4. And you are going to get crushed. So after knight f7, this piece was not captured. Instead, rook takes c2 was played. Bishop h6, still a very natural follow-up. We see rook takes rook check, knight takes, king takes bishop, but now it's simply over. Queen takes g7, king e8, and now g5 makes even more threats, threats of queening in fact. f5 is played to try to prevent this. We see queen takes g6 check, and now after e takes f5, this bishop's opened up, and black resigns. Of course, the game could have continued with king b6, when some trades might have occurred, and this pawn is simply going to queen. Nothing this rook can do to stop it, despite black, quote-unquote, being up in exchange here. So a very nice game by Boris Spassky here. It shows the power of the closed Sicilian when the kingside attack does break through in full force. And it shows that with black, you do need to be very careful. You need to create threats immediately on the queen side, or else you're simply going to get checkmated. Thank you very much for joining me for this episode of Game Review. My name is Caleb Denby, and I will see you next time.